We've looked already at 3 of the 4 poetry selections here. I want to start looking at the last one on the back, the longer one there. Romeo's speech before dead. She's buried. Romeo gets the news and hasn't gotten the message from Friar Lawrence that, in fact, she isn't dead. So he goes there with poison, intending to kill himself at her tomb. So this is after he's fought and killed Paris, who was trying to prevent him from desecrating the tomb. And here he takes one last look at Juliet before drinking this poison. And he says here, "How oft, when men are at the point of death, they have been merry, which their keepers call a lightning before death. Oh, how may I call this a lightning? O my love, my wife, death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath hath had no power yet upon thy beauty. Thou art not conquered. Beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, and death's pale flag is not advanced there. Tybalt, liest thou there in thy bloody sheet? Oh, what more favor can I do to thee than with that hand that cut thy youth in twain to sunder his that was thine enemy? Forgive me, cousin. Ah, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean, abhorred monster keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour? For fear of that, I still will stay with thee. Never from this place of dim night depart again. Here will I remain with worms that are thy chambermaids. Oh, here will I set up my everlasting rest, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh. Eyes, look your last. Arms, take your last embrace, and lips, O you the doors of breath, seal with a righteous kiss, a dateless bargain to engrossing death. Come, bitter conduct, come, unsavory guide. Thou desperate pilot, now at once run on the dashing rocks thy seasick weary bark. Here's to my love. And then he drinks the poison. Let's take a look at the first 9 lines or so. Just the first 9 lines. How oft? What does oft mean? Often, yeah. It's just a shorter version of, well, it's just an alternative version of often. How often, when men are at the point of death, when they're about to die, have they been merry? Merry is what?
Happy.
Happy, yes. Glad, happy. How often does that happen? Which their keepers call lightning before death. What does he mean when he talks about their keepers here?
Like the death.
I'm sorry?
Death.
Not death.
The people with like their head. Like people that are like their what is it? Their, it's like their like they're like
You're on the right track. When he talks about keepers, they're guards. What kind of people is he talking about that have this lightning before death? Not necessarily. These are people who have keepers. They're merry at the point of death.
the king.
Who might have a keeper, guard, when they're about to die? Yes, a prisoner who's about to be executed. Knows he's about to die. And his keepers, the keepers of these people, the guards, they call this a lightning before death. It's like a flash of light before they die, where in their last moments, they're merry, they're glad. Oh, how may I call this a lightning? A lightning here, Shakespeare's playing on these two words, lightning, flash in the sky, in short for this lightning, because there's light. The sky lightens for a moment when there's lightning. But here, when we talk about something being light, we can talk about it being bright, but also light as in not heavy, or not serious. When let's keep the tone of this conversation light. Let's keep it friendly. Let's not talk about serious things. Let's not get upset with each other. Let's keep it light and friendly and happy. But here Romeo says, how can, sort of reminiscent of what he said in the balcony scene, it is my lady, it is my love, he said then. And here he says to Juliet, oh my love, my wife, death, that hath sucked the honey of thy breath, hath had no power yet upon thy beauty. What does he say about death and its relationship to Juliet here? What about Juliet's beauty and death?
But she died, but she's still.
She,
The body is.
She still looks good.
She's not.
she's still beautiful. Yes, he says, death hath. Now again, as he's talking about how she's still as beautiful as when she was alive, we're reminded of this irony. What's the irony here?
She's not dead.
That she's not actually dead. And Romeo doesn't know that. She looks, her body looks so fresh and beautiful. Crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, and death's pale flag is not advanced there. So thou art not conquered, meaning what? What do you mean to conquer?
Take over.
Take over, defeat, yes. Take over. Ensign, yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks. Do you know what an ensign is?
Mm-hmm.
An ensign is a flag, or specifically a battle flag. And this is a crimson ensign. What is crimson?
A color.
Which color?
It's like kind of orangish.
Yeah, it's a bright red. Almost an orangey red. So, beauty's ensign, you haven't been defeated. Think of this imagery of a battle or a city being conquered. You see the city there. Juliet's like this city. It hasn't been defeated. And how can you tell?
I'm sorry.
How can we tell? He's comparing Juliet to a city that hasn't been defeated here. Beauty's ensign, he says, thou art not conquered. Beauty's ensign, yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks. How can he tell that Juliet has not been defeated by death?
Because she's still in her beauty.
Her beauty is still there, and we can tell because her beauty has a crimson ensign. Its flag is what?
Right.
Red. Where does he see this crimson ensign, this red flag?
Really?
In her lips and in her.
Eye?
What does he say?
Cheeks.
And in her cheeks, yes. Thou art not conquered. Beauty's ensign is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, yet still. There's still, the red flag of beauty is still waving there. One of the more unsettling changes that happens shortly after someone dies is that as the once the heart stops beating and the blood stops flowing, the blood in the body begins to settle. And so depending on how the body's lying, the blood will settle into lower spaces. So if the person's lying on their back, it's going to end up settling along their back. It's actually one of the ways that detectives can tell what position someone was in when they died. If they weren't moved shortly after they died, then the blood all pools in those places, and then it turns dark like bruising. And it's very pale. The bit of pinkness that we naturally see in people's skin goes away, and you can't quite point to the color change, but it's very pale and unnatural looking. And so normally we would expect Juliet to be very pale at this point. One of the reasons that funeral homes will usually put a lot of makeup onto people's bodies before they're awake. They look more natural that way. But here, we still have that red blush in her lips and in her cheeks. And death's pale flag is not advanced there. So again, continuing with this imagery, the pale flag of death hasn't yet advanced, hasn't yet gotten to your lips and your cheeks. It hasn't defeated those yet. The beauty is still holding out, at least for now, in her lips and in her cheeks. Okay, we'll pause there. because actually no. Let's just take the next couple of lines. Then he turns from Juliet to the other recent body that's here, and he says, "Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, whom he had killed the week or two prior. Liest thou there in thy bloody sheet?" What is the bloody sheet that he's talking about? It's this bloody sheet.
With sheet.
Hmm?
With sheet.
Sheet?
Bloody.
Yeah, the sheet, the shroud that he's covered with. He's covered with a cloth. His body is covered with a cloth there. And it's bloody because he died a violent, bloody death. He speaks to Tybalt. "Tybalt, liest thou there in thy bloody sheet? Oh, what more favor can I do to thee than with that hand that cut thy youth in twain to sunder his that was thine enemy?" What better favor can I do to you than what? With that hand that cut thy youth, your young age, that cut it in twain, that cut it in two. What's the hand that cut Tybalt's youth in two? Romeo's hand, because Romeo killed Tybalt. What better favor can I do than with the hand that killed your youth to sunder his, sunder means split or cut, his that was thine enemy, than to sunder the youth of the man who was your enemy. The hand that took your life is going to take the life of the man who killed you. Romeo. Remember, just before the fight with Tybalt, Romeo had been trying to avoid this fight. Instead of considering Tybalt his enemy, he considers him his relative, his family, because he's Juliet's relative, and because Juliet's fond of him. And here still, even though Romeo is the one who killed him in that fight that followed, he asks Tybalt's forgiveness. "Forgive me, cousin," he says to him in line 14. "Cousin," he calls him. He says, "Forgive me," because he was Juliet's cousin. All right, we'll pause there for today. On that one. I'll come back to that next week. So you can put these away for now, and we'll turn to have the review questions out because we're going to be talking about a lot of this stuff, and we're going to be continuing scene 1. Let me just make sure there's nothing we've really missed here. So, all right, so turn to page. Let's see, page 15. Page 15. We just finished reading on page 13. This fight has finally broken out. Capulet shows up. He asks his wife or he asks one of his servants for a sword, and his wife says, "You really should be asking for a crutch, old man. A crutch. A crutch. Why call you for a sword?" And then Montague shows up. Romeo's father and his wife show up at the very bottom of page 13. And his wife. So then the top of 15, we've got Capulet, Montague, Lady Montague, and the prince. Let's see. So why don't we take volunteers for Montague and Lady Montague.
I'll be Montague.
All right. Lady Montague,
I can be the
go ahead. So Capulet says, "My sword, I say! Old Montague has come, and flourishes his blade in spite of me."
Thou villain Capulet, hold me not, let me go.
Thou shalt not steal one foot to seek a foot.
Right. We see Lady Montague also is not really interested in her husband getting involved in this fight. Enter Prince Aeschylus with his train, with all of his attendants, his people. And the prince speaks here: "Rebellious subjects, enemies to peace, profaners of this neighbor-stained steel, will they not hear? What ho! You men, You beasts that quench the fire of your pernicious rage with purple fountains issuing from your veins. On pain of torture, from those bloody hands throw your mistempered weapons to the ground, and hear the sentence of your moved prince. 3 civil brawls, bred of an airy word by thee, old Capulet and Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets, and made Verona's ancient citizens, cast by their grave beseeming ornaments, to wield old partisans in hands as old, cankered with peace, to part your cankered hate. If ever you disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. For this time, all the rest depart away. You, Capulet, shall go along with me. And Montague, come you this afternoon to know our farther pleasure in the case. To old Freetown, our common judgment place. Once more, on pain of death, all men depart. What does the prince say here? First, he refers to the Capulets and Montagues and their families as rebellious subjects, enemies to peace, profaners of this neighbor stain and steel. He says that they quench the fire of their rage. Pernicious means destructive. They quench the fire of their destructive rage with purple fountains issuing from their veins. Quench means put out a fire. So the rage is compared to a fire here. And they're going to quench it. They're going to put it out with what? Not with water, but with what? You men, you beasts that quench the fire of your pernicious rage with purple fountains issuing from your veins. With their blood. These purple spurts of blood coming out of their veins. Yes, it's a great it's the blood that's going to put out the fire of their rage instead of anything else. And what does he tell them? On pain of torture, throw your weapons to the ground. And hear the sentence, hear the judgment. 3 civil brawls, bred of an airy word, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets. What's happened already? What's the background here? Fighting how many times? 3 times. There have been 3 civil brawls. Again, hear the word civil. These are brawls among civilians, among people who should be civilized. And these are brawls that are bred of an airy word. Bred by an airy word, by some light nonsense. It's just a word. It's like air. It's nothing. That has given birth to these brawls. Bred of an airy word. This is stupid nonsense you're fighting over, he says. And made Verona's ancient citizens, he refers to them as ancient citizens, to wield old partisans, partisan being one of these spear-like weapons, in hands as old. The weapons are as old as their hands. And what does he threaten them with? In lines 98 and 99.
They can kill them if they disturb the streets.
Yes, if ever you disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. You'll exit. So I'll take Benvolio, and you guys continue with Montague and Lady Montague. So Montague says to Benvolio,
Who set this ancient quarrel on Mill Broach? Speak, nephew. Were you by when it began?
Here were the servants of your adversary, and yours, close fighting ere I did approach. I drew to part them. I drew near to them. I got near to them to part them, to separate them. In the instant came the fiery Tybalt with his sword prepared, which as he breathed defiance to my ears, he swung about his head and cut the winds, who nothing hurt withal, hissed him in scorn. While we were interchanging thrusts and blows, came more and more, and fought on part and part, till the prince came, who parted either part. So people came in, they fought on one side and the other side, on part and part, and the prince parted, he separated every part, every group. Lady Montague.
Oh, where's your man? So you came today. Right glad I am that I am was not a despair.
Fray.
Right.
Yeah, fray means a fight. Benvolio. Madam, an hour before the worshipped sun peered forth the golden window of the east, a troubled mind drove me to walk abroad. Where underneath the grove of sycamore that westward roothed from the city side, so early walking did I see your son. Towards him I made, but he was ware of me, and stole into the covert of the wood. I, measuring his affections by my own, which then most sought where most might not be found, being one too many by my weary self, pursued my humor, not pursuing his, and gladly shunned who gladly fled from me. Montague.
Many a morning hath he there been seen, with tears augmenting the first morning's dew, adding to clouds more clouds with his deep sighs. But also soon as all cheering sun should in the farthest east being drawn, begin to draw the shady curtains from Aurora's bed. Away from light steals home my heavy son, in private in his chamber pens himself. Shuts up his window, locks fair daylight out, and makes himself an artificial night. Black and
Portentous
must this humor prove, unless good counsel may the cause remove.
My noble uncle, do you know the cause?
I neither know it, nor can learn of him.
Have you importuned him by any means?
Both by myself and many other friends, but he, own affection's counselor, is to himself. I will not say how true, but to himself so secret and so close, so far from sounding and discovered, as is the bud bit with an envious warmth. Ere he can spread his sweet leaves to the air, or dedicate his beauty to the same. Could we but learn from whence his sorrows grow, we would as willingly live pure as one.
Now Romeo is going to enter. Now, what is this conversation? So the fight gets broken up. Montague asks Benvolio what? The top of 17. What does Lord Montague want to know? The top of 17 there.
Wealth and
Yeah.
was when the fight started.
Right. How did this fight start? Were you there when it started? Benvolio answers. He says, no, it was already started when I got here. I tried to stop it. And then what does Lady Montague ask? She has a different interest.
If Romeo wasn't not why where's Romeo?
Right. She says, where is he? Have you seen him? She says, I am glad he wasn't here. Apparently she was expecting Romeo to have been there, given that there was this fight. But he's not there for whatever reason. And what does Benvolio say about Romeo's whereabouts?
Like an hour before. Okay. Early.
He saw Romeo walking early. What time of day?
Morning.
Before the sunrise, an hour before the worshipped sun peered forth from the golden window of the east. It's just a fancy way of saying an hour before sunrise. The worshipped sun, it looks out from the window of the east, the golden window of the east. So an hour before the sun rose, a troubled mind drove me to walk abroad. He's having trouble sleeping for some reason. He's just not like in a mood. And so he goes out for a walk, and he sees Romeo while he's out there in this sycamore grove, grove of sycamore trees on the west side of the city. So early walking did I see your son. What happens when Benvolio goes there? Toward him I made, but he was aware of me and stole into the covert of the wood. When Benvolio goes towards Romeo, what does Romeo do? And Benvolio says, I measured his affections by my own. So I knew how I was feeling. I assumed that he felt the same way. I used my affections, my feelings, to measure his. And he says, my affections then most sought where most might not be found. They looked for a place where most people wouldn't be found. He wanted to be alone. So he figured Romeo wanted to be alone too. He said, I pursued my humor, not pursuing his. Humor here meaning emotion, from the one who gladly fled from me. Romeo wanted to go away. I didn't really want to talk to him anyway, so we didn't interact. That was the encounter he had with Romeo that morning. Then we learned some more details from Montague about this behavior on Romeo's part. What does Montague say in response to Benvolio here? This is the very first line of his bit there, 134. Yeah, this happens to him many a morning. Hath he there been seen? What does he do when he's there in this sycamore grove? See that here? What does Romeo do in this sycamore grove in the mornings when he goes there? It's increasing. So there's dew in the morning. This is just in the sunshine. So there's dew on the ground. Romeo is increasing the dew with what? His tears. And the clouds, the mists, and the fog in the morning, he adds to those how? With his sighs. So Romeo's out there and he goes, ah, and his breath makes this cloud, and it increases the fog. And there's dew on the ground, and he's increasing with it. And then what happens, does Montague say at the top of 19, what happens as soon as the all-cheering sun in the farthest east begins to draw the shady curtains from Aurora's bed? Aurora is the dawn, the goddess of the dawn, in the Roman name for the goddess of the dawn. So when the sun in the east draws the curtains back from Aurora's bed, so think like one of those beds with the what are those called? With the four posts, and they've got curtains around them. So the sun comes in, it starts to draw the curtains, open up the curtains in the bed where dawn is lying. What is he referring to?
Sunrise.
The sunrise, right. When the sun starts to come out and it pulls the curtains back. So what happens when the sun rises? As soon as the sun rises, what does Romeo do?
Shuts his window.
He goes home, he shuts his window. Why? Right, he locks fair daylight out. He locks out the light, makes himself an artificial night. He paints himself, he locks himself privately in his chamber, in his room. He locks himself up in his room, closes the windows, and he says, black and portentous must this humor prove. This mood, this humor, is going to turn out to be black, to be bad, and portentous, and a sign of bad things to come, unless good counsel, good advice removes the cause. Something's going on with Romeo. I'm not feeling good about this. I don't like the direction this is going in. Every night he's out there feeling bad for himself in the woods. Sun comes up, he locks himself up in his room. So unless we can figure out the reason and give him some good advice to get rid of that reason, he might have some issues. Benvolio asks him, do you know the cause? I can neither know it nor can learn of him. Benvolio says, have you importuned him? Have you tried asking him? And Montague says, by myself and many other friends. We've tried asking him many times, but his own affections counselor, is to himself, I will not say how true, but to himself so secret and so close, so far from sounding a discovery, as is the bud, bit with an envious worm he leaves to the air, or dedicate his beauty to the same. He says Romeo is his own affections counselor. He gives advice to his own emotions. He doesn't consult other people. He only talks to himself. He's getting all worked up inside his head here. He's his own affections counselor, and he won't say that Romeo is so much true to himself, faithful to himself, but he is secret and so close. He keeps things to himself. So far from sounding. Sounding is what you do if you're in a boat, you want to know how deep the water is. You drop down a weight on the end of a rope, and so you see how far down it goes. That's sounding. So we can't sound out his emotions. Bit with an envious worm, before ere he can spread his sweet leaves to the air or dedicate his beauty to the same. It's like the bud of a flower that hasn't yet opened up. It's all closed up tight. And some little worm gets in there and eats it before it can open up. But we don't know what's going on. We don't see that. We know where his sorrows come from. We would as willingly give cure as no. We would be as glad to give him advice to cure this as we would be to just know about it. But he can't figure out what it is. He's worried that Romeo's like this flower bud that's secretly being eaten away inside. And so it's not going to be able to spread his sweet leaves to the air. Then Romeo finally shows up. Benvolio says, "See where he comes. So please you, step aside. I'll know his grievance or be much denied." He tells Montague, go away. Montague then says,
I would thou
yep.
I would thou wert so happy by thy side to hear the truth that shrift.
Yep.
Come, madam, let's away.
Right. I hope that you're happy by staying to hear true shrift, his true confession. Shrift is an Old English for confession. Come, madam, let's away. They're going to back off so Benvolio can talk to Romeo. Let's see. Let's actually wait to start this scene between it's still part of scene one. This conversation between Benvolio and Romeo. Let's wait till next week to do that. So start working on those Act 1, Scene 1 questions. You can ask me about them on Monday. We'll keep reading Act 1, Scene 1 then. Make sure you're working on your poems. Don't forget your response papers. Oh, I also have the tests, the grades are on Jupiter, and I'll give them back to those of you guys who took them in person. If I wrote fragment in a comment, or if I wrote it on the test, then you lost 1 point on that question for there being a fragment instead of a complete sentence. The grades were okay. There's a bit of a curve on it that I put on there. I ended up grading it out of 65 instead of 75. But the grades were all right. Not great, but not terrible.